So good evening, my name is Deacon Andy Hardigan, and as I was sitting down and praying about what the home and family faith and the domestic church in the parish means to me, my thought was to write down a letter addressed to the Prince of Peace Parish, so here it goes. Dear Prince of Peace Parish, when I traveled to Clinton to interview for a job at a local company 22 years ago, I flew into the Quad Cities and arrived in Clinton on a Saturday night. The next morning I wanted to go to church, so I looked up where the Catholic churches were located in Clinton and found St. Mary's Church that had a mass at 11:30. And actually when I got in there, I got into town, I was walking up there and didn't quite know the addresses, and first walked into Emmanuel Lutheran Church, then realized I wasn't the Catholic church, and ended up at St. Mary's and walking up those stairs. It was kind of humorous for me, but I've lived in a number of different cities in my life. Laramie, Wyoming, Tucson, Arizona, Big Rapids, Michigan, Indianapolis, Indiana, Easton, Maryland, Butte, Montana, and Rock Springs, Wyoming. But one thing that was common to all those places was a Catholic church and a Catholic community. In all these new to me cities where I and or my family went, this was always home base, a place familiar that I could relate to, and where I could find the one most important value that is center of my life, the Eucharist, and the community that, although the people are different, we're worshiping God together in the liturgy and works of charity to the community around them. And those different churches around the U.S. also link me to my extended family of aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters, mother and father, who, although they may not have been physically present where I was at, I knew that this worship of Christ as one family reached through the distances of time and space and united us all together. You see, the church has always been part of my family, and my family has been part of the church ever since the day I was born. I was baptized 5 days after I was born, as were my brothers and sisters. That is how important the faith and salvation was to my parents, and for them to pass it along through action and teaching us about our faith personally as we grew up. My grandparents, who had their share of challenges of immigrating and settling in the U.S., brought their Catholic faith with them and built churches with their extended community in the U.S. where they settled. Their stories and seeing what they had done when visiting them in my youth was a testament to me how their faith was handed down in action. But it went further than just those buildings. It was just seeing their involvement in the local community, such like the St. Vincent de Paul Centers, hearing their stories about helping out others in their communities during the Great Depression, giving of their time to help out neighbors who needed help, and generally providing hope and charity to those around them through their actions as a community that started from their home domestic church. But always at the center of this was their faith. And it was as evident as far back as I can remember. And they also passed it on to my parents. The three stories I will tell you of the billion that I have is the first. We always went to Mass, daily as often as we could, Sunday Mass and holy days always. And we would always have a Mass prior to our family reunions. And when I say I got a large extended family, we'd get together with like 200 or 300 people, and we'd be doing church under a tent outside of one of my family houses. But this action was originating in a family church. The second story we had is a devotion to the Rosary in the Black Madonna, or Our Lady of Czestochowa as we knew her in our Polish community. In this family miracle, my grandmother receiving her sight when she was born. And back in 1898, when she was born blind. I took her to the doctors, did what they could, but said she was going to be blind. My great-grandparents took her on a train, this was in the country of Poland, and traveled about 200 miles to the Czestochowa, the city, where the Black Madonna, Our Lady Czestochowa, was at. They went there, they went to Mass, they went through confession, they also asked for an intercession of Mary, and on the train ride home, my grandmother received her sight. The third and last story I'll share is how 7 brothers and sisters, we didn't have a lot of money. We drank a lot of powdered milk and had a lot of hand-me-downs. And my dad would write a check each week to the church and charities. And I asked him one day, we could really use that money at home. But his response was, we are fortunate, and this money is to continue the faith and charity through the church that reaches needs much further than we can do just on our own. But this faith and a saying that used to hang up in our house at home from the book of St. James said, I will show you my faith by my works. Faith in practice that my parents raised and demonstrated to me when I was young was my first domestic church that I was part of. At home, there was always a devotion to a rosary every week, and becoming an altar server was a badge of honor and a rite of passage. There were works of charity in our neighborhood as well. Our family phone number was known in town, and if you called it, it was known as the Hardigan Helpline, because if you called, one of us would go and help someone who asked, sometimes grudgingly, of course. But at the center of the charity was our home life and our domestic church that this came from. Sitting down every night to eat together as a family, praying together, and sharing stories of our day, our struggles, and our successes. And every Sunday, regardless of what we had going on, were Mass days and time to spend together as a family, doing something as picnics, or just going someplace to hang out together. And this practice still continues today in my immediate family. We don't do this as often as we used to, but about every other year we do fishing trips and collective family trips together. And this faith and values of my childhood domestic church and how they are ingrained into the larger church is how we lived in our life before coming to Clinton, Iowa. And then coming to Clinton, Iowa, I found it when I moved and settled here. In our home and being a husband and father of 2 young children, it was my time with my wife Shannon to be the head of my domestic church and to continue handing on the faith through works and actions. The parish was very welcoming to us. Through Mom's Group that helped my wife and I to meet people and become part of the community. Through the Knights of Columbus to do works of charity and become involved in the community. Through faith formations such as Popeyes or K4J or CW, just to name a few, and involving us as parents helped us to foster the faith that I had been raised with. There were abundant opportunities here in the parish for works of charity, such as food banks and funeral luncheons, mobile meals, victory center dinners, and cleaning the church, just to name a few, that could be handed on to my children as well. And I will tell you, the mobile meals and doing that with our children was a great way to go out in the community and meet people that might not have somebody to talk with them often. Great learning experience and also a faith experience and evangelization experience for my kids as well. But it is through the parish and the relationships with the parish and the community and the abundant charity opportunities that the parish and community have for us to get involved in that fostered and assisted my family domestic church to grow. Within our house, we have sacramentals such as holy water, crucifixes, images of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, just like my parents did. We continue to pray and sit together for meals every day, talk about our day and share our world together in that meal. It is in our common devotion to faith, charity, and giving of ourselves as a domestic church and as a family that with the Eucharist, the liturgy, and the sacraments at the center, that allows for us to continue to be part and grow as the one body of Christ, not only in our home, in our community, but part of the larger family of the parish through relationships of welcoming and belonging. And I occasionally sit back and wonder with respect how the faith of the domestic church that my grandparents and their parents had built through the love of two people through the sacrament of marriage impacted the domestic church that I have today, and which extends to Prince of Peace Parish, which I am part of as a community. To my parents and grandparents and all who came before me in the many cities that I have lived, I say thank you. To my extended family, I say thank you. To my immediate family, Shannon, Aaron, and Matthew, I say thank you. To the Universal Church, the Diocese, and the Prince of Peace Parish, I say thank you. It has been one fun life experience to know that I will find this welcoming and belonging regardless of where I go in the world, and how all these domestic churches come together in the various parishes and dioceses that are building the kingdom of God on the earth, here and now, for the glory of God, and how the domestic church in my home is part of this beautiful portrait that God lays out before us all, through the invitation of His mercy and love for all to take part of. Concluding with love, Deacon Andy Hardigan.
Our flyer that went out was 3 easy steps to losing your religion. And this is more of a cautionary talk. And as we go through the mission, we'll build on this, some of the common mistakes people make around religion and talking about it, and ask our Lord, who is present here in the Blessed Sacrament, to enlighten our minds and help us to know better a clear path forward. So I chose 3 things that over the course of almost 20 years now in ministry, I see as things that commonly happen in homes and in parishes where people really find struggle in something that should be rather easy. Now, the first one, I would say, is a disordered personal identity. A few weeks ago in the bulletin, I put up a little questionnaire about our identity and your personal beliefs, and this was one of the questions. What do you see yourself as first? Now, you got to be careful with this because it's not what you wish you thought or what you hoped you would do, but in fact what you really do, what you really see. When you make decisions, how do you make those decisions, and what is the moral foundation for your life? And I offered 4 options in that little questionnaire. The one was based on your country, so your country of origin and your heritage. And sometimes people will use their heritage as a reason for why they do something. They'll say, well, I'm stubborn because I'm Irish, or German, or Polish, or Dutch, or anything else. That's why I'm stubborn. Well, you might be stubborn just because you are who you are, and your heritage has nothing to do with it. But oftentimes, we'll use that as a lens through which to make our decisions. Then it might be politics. And many people see politics as the most important and driving factor of our culture, because at least with politics, you only have 2 or 3 parties to choose from. With religion, it's hundreds. And at least you can pick yourself one side of a political debate and know that you have at least some friends behind you. And then that is often reinforced by the media and by our interactions with other people, and the politics then becomes the number one decision maker in our lives. But for some people, it might be family. And your family might be your driving reason for doing what you do, and that's a good reason. You might go to work because you have a family to feed. You might get up and do the dishes because you have to maintain a home. Whatever it might be, family can also be a lens through which we see the world. And of course, we ought to put religion in. And religion is, of course, what I would consider myself first. I'd probably be someone who is part of a religion, who is in a family, who lives in a country, and who sometimes pays attention to politics. Probably in that order, with religion being the foremost. I remember when I was in seminary one year, I had a dilemma because I couldn't decide if I was going to be home for Christmas Eve or helping out at the parish. And my mom said, well, Paul, we already gave you to God, so just go to the parish. It's okay. If you have time for us later, that's fine. But we all knew how this was going to go down. And I said, oh, well, thanks, Mom. I appreciate that. And I went to the parish. Now, as I reflected on those 4 options, I realized that God had really probably put a 5th one in there, and that is marketing and consumerism. Because so many of the decisions that I see happening in people's lives are often based on other things that don't really fit neatly into one of those categories. People make decisions about their friends based on a favorite sports team, or a favorite brand of car, or a commercial that they saw, maybe their favorite drink. If you know somebody who really loves Diet Coke, try to convince them that Diet Pepsi is even better. Just see how that goes for you. Some people will make their decisions based completely on a consumer's mindset as well. And when they look at their menu choices and where they go and what they do, it is all based on something that we might consider something more like materialism, which is a topic I'll be getting to later. In the context of a family, then, the parents need to make very clear with their children what the proper order of life is. And in order to have a moral foundation for their lives, they have to be taught about God, and taught about how the world was made, and then how these other things build on top of it, and that religion makes a firm foundation based in God and the natural order, that we can then begin to understand things like politics and our country and our family and the proper way to use our money and our resources. And when you are reflecting on this, you might ask yourself, well, where did I spend most of my time last week? Where did I give most of my attention? Where did I put most of my money? Those things will tell you a lot about who you really are, and get away from the more of the fantasy idea of the person I wish I was. And children need to be able to see how they can put that in the proper order as well in their lives. Not just budgeting money, but also budgeting their time and attention throughout the day. Now, I added that fifth one in there, the idea of marketing, because the context of the country we live in America, is something that really can have a profound change on our lives. When I was in seminary, many of my classmates actually came from old Eastern Bloc countries in Europe and from South America and Central America and Africa. Many of them had never had any money or even an extra change of clothes. When they came to America, though, they found that the money was easy to get. And they would make friends with people from their national community there in Chicago. And before long, they started getting gifts, they started getting money, they started getting presents, they started dressing in a different way and becoming kind of the worst sort of American. And the guys who really fell into this were actually usually gone from seminary in about 6 months. Once they started going down that path of materialism, it's very easy to then encounter other sins. And if we're going to be able to get these other four things right, country, religion, politics, and family, we must put a proper context on the pursuit of sensuality, the pursuit of materialism, and that pursuit of comfort. Those are the sorts of things that will stifle a good, healthy debate and a growth of religion faster than about anything else. Now, this means that when we have that good, strong moral foundation and understanding of the way the world really is, we're able to then make a better presentation of ourselves to the world. And I'll get to that here in a little bit. So number one, as I said, was having your personal identity in the right place and helping a child form their own understanding of life from the bottom up. Not just what they would have been taught on television or social media, but receiving from their family a good moral foundation for their lives. Ready for number two? The use of authority in the family. One of the questions I asked, and I knew might get some interesting responses, was, should parents force their kids to go to Mass and confession and to pray? Well, the question was supposed to be a little bit controversial because I used the word should. Should parents do something? Well, ideally, parents are going to convince their kids to do something and bring them along where they want to go and do so willingly and happily. But there are times where a young one might throw a tantrum or be angry about something. Well, and then what do you do? I remember being at a subway and I was watching a mom go in and order a sandwich for her child. And mom made her order and asked the kid, well, what do you want? And the kid said, McDonald's. And they had a fight there in the store. I remember one of my nieces throwing a tantrum in a restaurant once, and my brother simply just grabbed her by, and she was laying on the floor, kicking and pounding her feet, and he just simply grabbed her by the ankle, and they walked out the door. Now, have any of you parents ever had to do something like that? Sometimes that happens with a toddler who's having a meltdown. And sometimes with a teenager who's out of control, there has to be some reasonable, well, shall we use the word force involved to prevent the child from hurting himself or hurting others. When we look at the spiritual life and things like going to Mass and going to confession, sitting down to pray, there will be, at a certain age, this willfulness that erupts in the child and will just say no. And parents will immediately start to feel bad about it because they couldn't possibly force their child to do something religious. They wouldn't want to force their personal beliefs on someone else. But this is where we get into the role of authority. And in a modern world, people can have a really hard time with authority itself. We don't tend to trust our politicians. Maybe we don't even trust our bankers. We don't trust Hollywood. It can be hard to trust the priests and the bishops sometimes. There's all these, the normal authority figures we've always relied on throughout the last 100 years have slowly kind of been picked apart and shown for many of them to be, well, not as trustworthy as we thought. Unfortunately, that is also then transferred to the role of a parent. And parents sometimes feel as though they don't have the ability to discipline their children or would even receive the backing of the rest of the family or their friends if they had to really put their foot down and say, this is what must be. So I thought I would pull some sacred scripture out and give you a little bit of wisdom here. From Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and reject not your mother's teaching. A graceful diadem will they be for your head, a pendant for your neck. And in Deuteronomy chapter 6, we hear this shout to Israel that they understand that God is one and God alone. And in chapter 6, verse 4, it says, keep repeating this to your children. With this idea of the good things from God and are things like, we are a family that prays together. We are a family that believes in God. We are a family that goes to church on Sunday. We are a family that is pro-life. We are a family that believes in the protection of the innocent. And on and on and on. All those classic moral sorts of things that we believe need to be repeated from a very early age, all the way up and reinforced. And when a child becomes willful or decides they don't want to listen to that anymore, you've got to treat it like you would anything else. They don't want to eat their vegetables. Well, you sit there until you eat your vegetables. I'm a grown-up, I've got more willpower than you, and we're both going to sit here until you eat your vegetables. Or, I don't want to go to practice. I don't want to go lift. I don't want to go run. You signed up for these sports, you made a commitment, and we are going. And there is no discussion. And off you go. And they decide that they have, you've already laid down a rule where social media is only to be used in a certain way, and they have broken the rule for their phone. You take away the phone. This would be the same thing if you found out that your child had become addicted to some horrible substance. You would do everything possible in your willpower to protect them from having any access to that harmful chemical. If they were in danger of hurting themselves, you would go through the house and take everything out of the house that they might use to hurt themselves. If they were around a friend who you knew was no good, you would be on the phone to the kid's parents. You would be laying down the rule you were not to hang out with this person. You would be installing cameras in the house. You would do all those things. When we talk about religion, then, we have to be able to expend the same amount of energy we would do for those other things and say, we are going to church together. We are now going to kneel down and pray together. We are going to make something happen in this home that is prayerful, and you are going to listen. Do we have the ability to practice that authority? Well, it can be difficult. And when we do go to Mass, it should be something that, I use that word should force or should make them do it. They shouldn't ever get to that point. The idea of going to church should be something that fills the heart with joy and happiness. It should be pleasant. Dress up. Go out to eat together after Mass. Maybe just get a box of donuts and take them home. I reflect that too often on our expression of worship together, that it often does look like a chore. And we say things like, you have to go, you have to do this, and you get this idea of it simply being a burden. But if we can do things to make it a celebration, then we'll never have to get to that point of force. I was, many years ago, was invited to my little brother's school. They were getting ready for their little Thanksgiving dinner they were going to put on. A bunch of the mothers had come in, and they were getting some turkey heated up, and they were making some stuffing, mashed potatoes and gravy, and all these things for their little class celebration. It all looked very adorable. And one group was in charge of making the cranberry sauce. And I actually never made cranberry sauce before. My mom had made it when I was there as a young priest. I thought, well, I could help out. And so we started putting the cranberries in the pot, and I looked at the instructions, and it says something like 2 cups of sugar. And one of the moms says, just half a cup is fine. You ever had cranberry sauce with just half a cup of sugar in it? I said, well, yeah, but that's going to taste horrible. And they said, well, the kids aren't going to eat it anyway, so why waste it? And so they made it according to their recipe. But the funny thing was that as the kids were going through the line getting all their stuff, they see this beautiful, bright red bowl of something that looks like jam, looks like jelly. And they all took a big spoonful, and I'm watching this. What's going to happen? And every single kid takes a big bite of cranberry sauce, makes the puckered face, ooh, spits it out. Every single one of them. And from that moment on, what do you think they all thought about cranberry sauce? It was always going to be sour. It was always going to be bitter. Well, if we're not making good experiences around holy things, what is that experience that kid is going to have for years to come? If it always turns into a shouting match, and it always turns into a punishment and something of that nature, well, of course, then later on it's going to be hard. But I'm so thankful that my parents worked hard to make our experience of going to Mass and going to church something that we look forward to, something that was positive. Ready for number 3? Number 3 is what we call a lack of effective communication. I've already touched on this aspect a little bit. But I was very interested in something called the worry to offend. When we bring up a subject like religion, we're always worried that we're going to offend somebody, or we're going to say something wrong and it's going to have the wrong effect. And so we don't tend to talk about it at all. This is a question I'll often give my couples that are preparing for marriage. I'll say, when you started dating, did you pray first or did you kiss first? And sometimes I don't even ask kiss, I skip to the next thing. And they'll say, oh, well, we've never prayed together. I said, have you done everything else? Oh, yes. But you never prayed together. No, that's far too intimate. Isn't that funny? That people have this idea of religion that is something that is so intimate and so personal, I could never even share that with my future spouse. But I hear that all the time. And it is, especially in American society, a very taboo subject. Because just by looking at someone, you don't know if they are Catholic or Lutheran or Episcopalian, Jewish or Muslim or atheist. And by saying the wrong thing, you could end up with a shouting match. Now, I've been to the Holy Land 3 times, and interestingly, when we think about the Holy Land, we think about it as a place where it is full of religious conflict. The thing is that when it comes to everyday conversations, they don't have near as much conflict on this issue as we do. And I was talking with various tour guides over the years, and they would say, Father, you Americans, you talk about sports and the weather. We talk about God. And whether you are Jewish, Muslim, or Christian, we always talk about God. We talk about our history. We talk about our scripture. And it's fascinating. And they're all very interested in talking about things of religion, because, of course, they're right there. They're living in the place where all these things happen. But for Americans, we always want to keep that subject a little bit hidden. Oftentimes we'll talk about politics before we talk about religion. religion. And there's a reason why it is a taboo subject. I did a little research on some websites today about psychology, and there's some interesting theories about this. First off, they say that when you go and talk about religion with the purpose of converting somebody, you're almost always going to get a negative response. So if you say something like, if you don't go to church on Sunday, you are going to hell, you can probably imagine what the response is going to be, right? And people will often turn away and ignore it. Or you go to somebody who's a devout member of another religion or no religion, and you say, you should be Catholic. You should go get baptized. Well, that response is not going to have the desired effect. There's a time and place for that. But the sorts of things that elicit a more generous response is something like, I felt such peace when I went to Mass this morning. It really gave me the boost for my day, and I was able to then take something with me when I went and had a spring in my step. Now somebody might be curious about that and say, well, could I also go and check this out? Well, yes, we suppose you could. Here that is, or if you say, you know, I've joined a Bible study or a catechism study in the evening and just got some of my friends together, and we've really had an amazing time thinking and talking about these things. And really anyone can join. Well, that might get the coworker to show some interest and come in. You're doing something where when you're using effective communication tools, you're using it as an invitation, not simply as a command. Now, you can offer commands when the people are already here. So you are already here, members of the church, and already faithful Mass goers. So I can say, take on some more penances during Lent. It'll be good for you. Make sure that you're going to Mass every Sunday. Keep at it. And don't forget, no meat on Friday. But see, you're already believers. So you're all thinking, yes, Father, yes, we agree. The question is, how do you say that to somebody who is not yet a believer? Because we don't at first need to demand that everyone else agrees with us. The reality of our country is that we do live in a pluralistic society where people have many, many choices. But this will actually go back a little bit to our first point about that concept of marketing and consumerism in our culture. When I was a kid, we at any one time only had one choice for breakfast cereal. It was either Cheerios or Wheaties or Raisin Bran. And when one ran out, Mom might get a different one. And we would have input in the aisle, and then she would say no. But now, I remember I was looking, this is now many years ago, I don't eat breakfast cereal anymore, looking on top of the fridge of the rectory, marveling that there were 7 different breakfast cereals out there. Wow, how many choices. And many young people, that is their experience of all of life. They've got all these choices. And there's so many choices they could get that they will begin to think that simply because there are so many choices, that means that there is no right answer. They'll simply say there are pros and cons. Just like the choice for cereal in the morning. Some are going to be healthier for you, some will taste better, but there is no one right answer. Well, then religion becomes the same thing. And if children grow up in a home where there are just a plethora of choices upon choices upon choices, of course, they will have a very hard time ever deciding on just one thing. And so we have to then be able to, when we talk about communication, be able to express why our faith is the one true faith. And this is something that we're going to get to in the next couple of talks, but it is about this idea of being able to speak clearly and sincerely and using very simple terms to describe the truth. And I'll try to do this in all of my homilies when we're talking about the nature of God and true religion. How do we know that this is the right way of doing things? So, if we then look at all the many religions out there, it is probably worthwhile to spend a little bit of extra time and study looking up some of those answers for yourself. Has there always been some kind of a niggling little doubt in the back of your mind about some teaching of the church? How much effort have you put into to finding the answer to that. Again, it reveals a bit of a fallacy in human thinking that if I don't know the answer to something, then no one else does either. Well, that's not true. The answers are there if we but take time to look for them. So we have to be able to get over that worry that we might offend somebody, because we're able to then express it as an invitation and as a respectful exchange of ideas. And if we know that we have the right answers, we're going to begin making converts that way. On Sunday, I talked about the need for intellectual knowledge about what it is that we believe. And knowing who Christ is, knowing the historical documents that back it up, understanding how the Jewish scripture prepared us for the Messiah, and then seeing the work of the early church in those first and second centuries, chewing on the teachings of Jesus and formulating them into doctrines and dogmas that we can now pass forward into the future. We are inheritors of real things. It wasn't just a bunch of cardinals and bishops sitting around a coffee table in the Vatican and deciding, let's try to find things that are really going to make people mad. We'll write that down. And then maybe we'll decide that on Fridays it can be really special, so let's do something on Friday. Okay. And then by show of hands, yep, okay, we all agree. Let's do that. It's not how it happened. The bishops merely take on what was handed on to the apostles from Christ himself. Christ was a real person. And when we express our Catholic belief, we are expressing the faith of the earliest Christians. And typically when we talk about how the Christian faith is practiced or other faiths are practiced in our community, that tends to be people of a Protestant background. There may be a few atheists and a few Muslims, a few Jewish people and Buddhists and other things, but for the most part, these will be members of denominational Christianity. And there are reasons why we don't agree. Understanding those reasons will help us to be more effective communicators, not just in the world, but also in our own homes. So I hope that these three things help to provide a little bit of insight into how the domestic church needs to be built up. First, helping the children to have a solid foundation for their lives, understanding the proper order for how to build their personality, understanding the role of authority from parents in raising of their children, and finally the ability to communicate wisely and effectively our ideas. Now, one of the things that I'm encouraging families to do is to set up a little prayer table at home, and hopefully by the end of our mission, maybe we'll have a few prayer tables and areas set up. We'd love to have those pictures so we can share them on the parish Facebook page or the parish website. At the entrance of the church, we have a big table set up with a bunch of religious goods donated to us, and any donations made for those items will go to the St. Boniface Historical Society to maintain the old St. Boniface building. So at this time, we will now have the conclusion of adoration with benediction, the rite of which can be found on the back and inside cover of your missals. Please.